wanted to do is I was fortunate in Portland to be the recipient of the Drum Majors for Justice Award at the prayer breakfast there in Portland. And it was a humbling award. It was the only award that I received actually that had a check tied to it. They gave me the plaque and a check. And I said, well, what do I do with this check? They said, whatever you want to. Continue the work that you're doing. And I was very impressed with that. But when we were planning the Seattle prayer breakfast, I wanted to also lift up leaders who were doing the work in the community and would never really seek the recognition. And of course, the very first, we gave 2 awards, and one of the recipients of that award was Harvey Drake. The tradition of, we named it the Mountaintop Award. And it was a way of taking leaders in the community whom you may not see or pay attention to or know the work that they're doing, and it's lifting them up and say, this is the model that Dr. King gave his life for. This is the legacy carriers that Dr. King wanted us to carry for. And so I think you all have continued that tradition. Alan eventually did a partnership with Urban Impact, and the breakfast became part of the umbrella of programs and services that Urban Impact has done. It went from 75, maybe 100 people at the basement of the old Seattle Presbyterian Church. It got to be about 300 and 400 people, and I thought, well, this is where I need to bow out. And I think you all now can get up to 600 to 700. I don't know what the last count was, but I knew that this was working when I would go to that breakfast and people would say, okay, let's get it on the calendar for next year. Let's get it down. And they would plan to be there. And that was a fellowship that I was very, very, very excited for. Then there were people living in Edmonds. There were people like Dave Teitzel. And by the way, I didn't know he's going to be online here. And a few other people that said, you know, the what you're doing in Seattle is great, but we need you to do something in Edmonds, something in South Snohomish County. And I really didn't have it in my heart to do another morning prayer breakfast. Something did occur to me to promote a beloved community as represented by Dr. King: love, redemption, reconciliation. That is his definition of a beloved community. That's the end, by the way. That's the end of all the work we do. The end of the rainbow is the beloved community. And I found a young man named Sam Vance. He had put on a concert, peace concert, and I went to it. And I wasn't going to go. I met Sam at Shoreline Covenant. But Ross said, no, you told Sam you're going to go to this concert and you're going. So I went, and that concert just stirred my soul. He just had various people perform in accordance to their heart around peace. And I thought, that's what God is calling you to do for your next Martin Luther King event, is something in song, spoken word, and dance. And it's an evening event. And Sam helped me put that first one on, and man, it was church all over again in a very big way. And I had no idea that it would continue. I'm now doing it virtually for the 3rd year. And for the last 2 years, I've often said, I don't think I can do it again. It takes a lot to put this on. But there's a voice that's bigger than me. And sometimes that voice shows up in other people. This year, I didn't have it in my heart at all. In 2020, this was a very difficult year for me. I went through stages of depression, malaise, just wasn't feeling it. But a number of people who went for the last 2 years would come to me and say, you have to do it. It has to happen. I had a friend to say that, Donnie, sometimes you choose the event and other times the event chooses you. This is the year that the event chose me. So I have recognized that being an old retired guy, that God has called me to work in a number of areas. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King events is just one of the ways in which God has called me to work. I've developed some skills and talents that are totally outside of anything I'd ever managed to do, and just didn't know why I was doing those things. I manage a state agency of 10,000 employees. That is totally outside my bailiwick. I don't know what I was doing. I even, while I was in the phone company, was general manager of 911 public safety across 14 states. I couldn't tell you how 911 works. But God just said, you need to just lean on me. I'd say, why did you bring me to this job? He just lean on me. What's that line? Trust not in your own understanding. I think that's a proverb somewhere in Proverbs. And that was what I did. But when I retired, all of those skills belonged to him, and he let me know that. And he continues to let me know that. I continue to say, Lord, I think I want to learn to play golf, or I want to learn to, hike some mountains around the area. I want to sleep in. And God never tells me no. You can learn golf, you can take hikes, you can sleep in. It's not a either or thing, but you still work for me. And I'm just thankful that there are many of you here who are online here who have helped guided me in listening to God's message. We are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that he's already created for us to do. Can you think about that? I think it's Ephesians 2:4, something like that. He's already prescribed the work for us in advance. And rather than thinking about what is that work, he just wants us to lean on him. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the work is there. He knows what it is. And I'm happy to say, even in my greatest reluctance, he has guided me to move in that direction. I just did a little talk for Quest Church, and I was talking about Dr. King, who was a reluctant man. There's a man 25 years old at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He wanted to be a college president. He had no vision of being a civil rights leader, but he did get a call. And that call was, we need you to help us. We're planning a bus boycott. Sister Rosa Parks got arrested. And we just need somebody who's new in town. Dr. King was thinking about how to be a good pastor. But he reluctantly said yes. He reluctantly said yes. So I think about that as inspiration sometime when I just don't feel like it. It's not happening. God sort of says, you can be Moses for a little while, but I got work for you. That's my story.
Well, thank you, and appreciate you being willing to chat. I know that Pastor Harvey has a question on his heart. I wanted to just ask one more follow-up in terms of the why behind the events. Obviously, you and I had enough conversations, and I know that event production and events are not your thing. Like, you're not really geared up just to run events. What are you hoping? What do you feel like? Why does God keep prompting you to pull together these kind of catalytic moments for communities like Seattle and Edmonds, like happened in Portland? What's behind that? What are you hoping happens?
It happens afterwards. Even Choose 180 program you and I have worked on, Steve, and I'm now working with dads and up in the Snohomish County area, I'm working with the Communities of Color Coalition. It's what happens afterwards. When I'm in the mix of doing it, I can think of, man, I don't want to do this again. In fact, I just said to Ross the other day, boy, I think this might be my last one. But when you can see the Spirit of God working in other people, in the Seattle prayer breakfast, the greatest joy is when it's over and people are fellowshipping together. And in some cases, these are people who haven't seen each other in years. And then in other cases, they say, well, we need to do something ourselves. Why don't we get together and have lunch and have coffee? And we need to do something. In this last situation, when I decided I wasn't going to do a virtual event, what is a virtual event? I had people from other churches and other community groups who had attended the previous two events in Edmonds and said, look, Donnie, what will it take? Because, you got to raise money for this stuff. It just doesn't happen overnight. You got to have upfront money. And this one woman said, I've been to two of them. And I said, well, I guess got to figure it out. And she wrote a check for $3,000. And she said, well, I'll put this on the table. And if there's something else you need, would you call me? And I thought, I looked at the check and Lord, really? And then, wonderful, wonderful woman, Arwen Valdez, who's a great project manager. You always need somebody who can put these pieces together. She said, I want to work with you this year. And I said, well, I don't know if I can pay you. And she goes, I don't want your pay. I don't want to be paid. And I said, can you write that down on a piece of paper? Because I need to see it. And she just has been marvelous at putting it together. So I think the bottom line is that when people are touched, when people are moved, and they are moved, not because I did it, but because I allowed God to work in me, I allowed him to direct my feet. I allowed him to be present through my activities. And, it's easy to say that, but, sometimes I want to say, God, I want to sleep in today. And he says, all right, you sleep in, but when you get up, I got some things I want you to do. So that's really what's behind it, Steve. I really am touched by how others are touched. And that inspires me to do it one more time.
Thank you. Pastor,
thank
welcome.
You. Hey, thank you. Sorry I was a little late, everybody. But I am here now, and I've enjoyed what I've heard so far. I've got a couple questions. Actually, we want to open it up for you all, but we'll ask a couple just to get the pump primed. And I was just thinking about kind of the event itself, and people are always asking, so what? And what do we do? And I don't want you to answer that yet, but I want to keep asking that question until we sense that God is giving us something that we can do that's actionable, that will move the dial more in his direction, something that would change the trajectory of where the nation and our region may be going now, so that we begin to reflect more and more of the heart of God and the heart that was behind Dr. King. I often say people want to give Dr. King the moniker of a civil rights leader, but he was a pastor trying to get the nation to live up to what the scripture said about all of us being created equal in the sight of God, period. Now, it had civil rights ramifications, but the bottom line is he was just trying to get people to live into the vision that God had for his created order. So we'll talk about that. But I want you today, what's happening today that you are seeing or experiencing or hearing about that you think would either grieve Dr. King or cause him elation?
What was the
That,
first
that would be a question for all of us, actually.
that would cause him? I heard the
Related. That
grief.
one that would cause him grief, and one something that would cause him grief. What's happening today that would grieve his heart and his spirit? And is there something happening today that would bring him joy?
Well, Dr. King had a very, very challenging life. He did some things that even Black folks didn't like. He was among the few Black folks that said the Vietnam War was not God's work. And he was, it upset the president who helped him with legislation, President Johnson. It hurt a number of Black leaders who thought he was going too wide. I don't know if anything would cause him great grief. I know there's things that happen on January 6th certainly has caused me grief.
Yeah.
But I think Dr. King had a vision that went beyond that. I don't know. The grief part is an answer I'd have to think about a little bit, because studying the man, I know he had a lot of grief in his heart. He had personal grief with his home being bombed.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of grief with the FBI trailing him and calling him a communist. I don't know that there is. I think maybe the biggest grief, now that I think about it, is that the church is waning. And the church is still the most segregated place in America at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would cause him grief. The elation part, and I'd be willing to hear more about that. The elation part is that I think he would be pleased that 27 people have come online today. That's how many who are here right now, to talk about not him, but God's will on earth. I think he would be pleased with that. I don't think he would be pleased that his name is used for the purpose of bringing people together, but he would be pleased that there are people who are willing to carry the light. So I'll go with that as an answer.
Now, I would dare to ask is, would anyone else want to respond to that question? What do you think might bring grief to Dr. King, or what might bring him some joy? Diana? You're on mute.
I would say one word came to my mind that fits both of those bills, and it would be turmoil. I mean, turmoil is horrible, and we don't like it. It makes us grieve to see what's been happening, but it also calls us to action.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Charlene?
I feel like he would be grieved to see the division, that there is still such division,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that there are still so many Black people who are being murdered, shot, especially by police officers. That I just think that would bring him great grief.
Thank you.
I got one that I'll chime in. Go ahead, Les.
Yeah, Les. You're on mute, Dr. Steele.
There we go. Got it. Thank you, Pastor Harvey. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to step in a little bit here probably, but my sense is Um, Dr. King understood that politics was a means to an end, not the end itself. He understood that the work he had stepped into, had been called into, required political savvy, required political engagement. But the end itself was not political. It was the beloved community that transcended political lines, platforms, and parties. And I think it would grieve Dr. King to see that we've reduced our conversations of reconciliation often to political platforms. I think you would be elated to know the micro revolutions and reconciliation that are part of this conversation, a part of the work that Donnie is doing, that Steve Harvey, you guys have been doing for what, about 90 years now, I think. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Steve, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to chime in, and I think along the lines that Les just brought up, that we often look to political solutions for what is really kind of heart issue or spiritual issues. And I think Dr. King knew that the heart had to change and that it had to engage. I think of John Perkins and Dr. Perkins being a very similar, like he knew the engagement with individuals. We're preparing for the ML King event on Monday, and we're using a lot of footage where our theme in Seattle is then and now. And so we've been looking at footage of the marches and stuff then. And Dr. King was one that didn't deny the need for the Black community to be in the front of the line, but in many of the footages, he's arm in arm with a person of a different ethnicity. He's, if there's women and men marching together, it's, you can hear his speech, Protestants and Catholics, Jews and Gentiles. And his life work was to engage folks in so many different varieties of ways. And I think because he knew it was relationship, it was the heart of people that had to change in order. The reason nonviolence forces the heart of a person to be confronted. And so his message was more than just a political solution. He didn't, like you said, he didn't go to the government to solve the problem. He knew that political means were at different ends. But I was also gonna say that I think what would grieve him, that grieves me today, is how the church has been so easily co-opted. And I don't think it was then too, in the footage around the then and now. The church was not all for civil rights in the middle of the civil rights movement. Even the Black church at times held back from and say, don't get involved in that social gospel. But the church was conflicted. And I think today, when you watch, the events of January 6th, and you see the Jesus Saves signs and the Christian flag, intermined in the middle of it, and you go, I think that breaks God's heart. I think that would break Dr. King's heart. I think he would have a message for pastors and for the church that would challenge us to be engaged in that work. So that's what came to my mind. I want to redirect the conversation as well, but I'll linger here a little bit more if anybody else has a thought on what would grieve or what would bring Dr. King joy. We got Gil and then Dave.
Gil and Dave.
Yeah, I was thinking about this time in particular. It seems like the pandemic has got us thinking about people on the front lines, essential workers, people who are serving others, and those who are dying like martyrs, and that we have one common enemy, all of us, whether we're Black, white, brown, there's a recognition, that somehow we've all got to pull together to get through this. And I think Dr. King would appreciate that widespread recognition, in people's hearts, that that we're all together in this. We that we're dependent on each other. There's something there.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
I
Brother
even
Dave?
think before Dave, the sanitation work, one of the protests was for sanitation workers. Kind of, I would say that he saw those as frontline workers, Gil, to add to that. That's good. Yeah, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to amplify what Gil just said. I agree with the notion that we have a common enemy. We need to pull together as Americans of every race, creed, color to defeat that. And I think Dr. King would be discouraged with the somewhat chaotic approach we've had up to this point, where we've been, arguing about wearing masks or not wearing masks and, these kind of silly things, when we should be pulling together and battling this in a unified way. That's just not happening. Having said that, I think you'd be discouraged by that, but there's optimism on the horizon. I think with the vaccine coming online, I think with the new administration, we'll be seeing a more organized approach getting the vaccine out. And so I think, looking into the latter part of this year, there's some very positive things. So I think Dr. King would be encouraged with what he's seeing in terms of the trend. But so it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think we've got frustration, some discouragement up to this point, but there's light on the horizon.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been inspired, truly inspired by the courage of the individuals who were out in front in the 60s, 50s, 60s, right? And no matter how vindictive, how mean, assaulting the system was, it did not deter them from the work and the call, if you will, to make America better. And I often wonder, what would it take for us to regain that kind of courage, that in the face of opposition, the face of assault, that would keep us going until we achieve what God has in store or in mind for us. Just thinking. And I was also impressed that unlike what we just saw, what we've been watching for, since March, I guess, since Ahmaud Arbery was murdered and all, just in all the protests, I don't think I ever saw him do a tit for tat or do anything in line with vengeance. He kept his straight, because Romans have been really speaking to me about not being overcome by evil, but overcoming evil with good. And what we've been seeing is just been almost antithetical to that idea that God is the one who avenges us. And I think for me, the power in what Dr. King did and how he went about his work being nonviolent, I think was what gave his work some power as well, and gave him this ultimate credibility. I was going to say cred because that's what some of the kids say. Give him that credibility with the nation, because he didn't come back and, okay, you hit me, now I'm going to hit you. But they stayed the course, and it was just powerful. And I am saying, God, what would it take for us to live in that same kind of vein, whereby we would reflect more the heart and the will of what God wants versus what we think we want, because ultimately that's what it's about, right?
Pastor Marta, you unmuted. I'm wondering if that's for a comment.
Me? Oh, okay. Yeah. As you know, one thing I keep thinking about is that Dr. King really pulled people to walk side by side with facing towards a vision that they could believe together and of a better future for so many, not just them, but and not their neighbors, but even future generations. I dream of the day when. And I think he'd be sad to see over these months, but especially the last couple of weeks, that it's all about my rights right now, and you can't make me do what I don't want to do. What a contrast and it's face-to-face clash rather than let's stand side by side and move forward together.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to take a shift, and I appreciate the discussion here we're having, and maybe I'll let Pastor Harvey and Donnie check me on this question. But working with the both of you, I know that carrying the mantle that you carry often weighs heavy on you individually, and being Black men who have chosen to walk alongside those of us lighter complected folks, often it has a unique weight to it. I know that both of you, this year has been a very difficult year. Watching the incidences that we've watched, the national media, the weight of George Floyd's death. I know that both of you received lots of phone calls and sometimes no calls. Sometimes nobody cares, and other times everybody's blowing up your phone trying to get you to make a comment or wanting to connect with you. What is it about working with white folks that is so draining? Is how I want to ask the question. I think that may be an unfair question. You may not, you're on a call with 24, 22 white folks. So I recognize that I'm setting you up a little bit. But Harvey wants to ask the question, what do we do? But I think before what we do is, how can we engage with you well so that working with us is less demanding or less painful?
Go ahead,
Summarize
Pastor Harvey, you go on that one.
summarize that question for me again.
What is it about working? So you carry the mantle of being Black men working oftentimes with white leaders and white peers, and many of your peers just avoid that altogether. And many other white folks just kind of engage with white folks and Black folks. You have chosen to be people who have been bridge builders in that, and bridges get walked on usually. And so I'm just curious from your kind of personal perspective, what makes it what makes it draining? What makes it joy filled? What makes you stay in this fight with us?
Great question. I would say, let me speak to the draining part first, because I think ultimately it's the vision that God has for all of us that keeps me going. And I don't care how long it's been, how tough it's been, I still believe that God wants to fulfill that within this earthly realm. And it starts with those of us who have a bona fide commitment to God and his ideals. So that's the hope part. So it's the hope that it can eventually happen. And it's secondly, I realize that nothing good happens unless there's work involved. There's travail involved, there's labor involved. And that's probably where the draining part is, because you would think by now we would not be having these same conversations, that we would find some new bushes to go around, but we seem to be going around the same bush. And that's because I think there's still a level of denial that still exists in our culture. And we don't reflect hard enough or honestly enough about what has been, so we can avoid it as we move forward. And so that becomes draining in some ways, that we say, okay, here we are again. In fact, you all remember on May 20th, the 2-page ad that was taken out in the Seattle Times. It was a letter of lament, confession, and commitment. And that letter came about because I said to a group of white people, I'm tired of talking. I want to see some action. Talk is not enough. I literally said to the president of Northwest College and a few others, I don't time out for sympathy. I need something other than sympathy. And so because it's like we're here again. And then but it's still that's still for me the thing that keeps me going, that keeps me hopeful, because I'm finding people who are starting to get it. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Will we ever be? Probably not. But we're starting to get it. And we're starting to have some courageous conversations about what is, so we can get to what should be. And that keeps driving me. That keeps me going. That keeps me hopeful. And even in those moments when I feel drained, I feel worn out, I feel encumbered by the whole burden, if you will, the possibility keeps me going. Now, the reason that happens is because I grew up in the housing projects in San Francisco. I was a ghetto kid, welfare dependent kid, right? And so I'm used to just trudging along and fighting it out and making it happen. And so I don't get as discouraged as some, because my whole life has been about struggle. And so even though at times this can be a struggle, it didn't bother me because I grew up in struggle. And so I think in many ways, I can actually say God was preparing me for such a time as this, because he needs somebody who does not run when things get hard, who do not give up when things get tough or when it seems impossible. So just a couple thoughts. There are a few others, but Donnie, you want to chime in?
Well, yeah, I'll try to answer that question. It's really a provocative question.
Yes.
When I look back over the 68 years of my life, I can see instances where God has said, this is your job. Your job is to be a bridge builder, and it's to be a bridge between multicultural communities. Even my wife who is white, I did not want to marry a white woman. I was in love with this woman, but I wasn't going to marry her. I was not going to take a white woman home to my mom. And I had a voice one night that said, let go. And I called my girlfriend up. I was living in Portland. I had gotten a promotion and moved to Portland, and she was still in Seattle. I really thought that was a time where, okay, this is the time for you to break off, and you can, in Portland, she's in Seattle, and it just said, no, you need to let go. So I called her up and I said, time for us to get married. She had some conditions. And I knew I had to meet those conditions. But that was significant to me, because getting together wasn't just the fact that she was white and I was black and I didn't want to marry a white woman. It was God saying to me, no, this is part of the job I got for you. And I can think of other instances even before then where God has put me in the situations where I was bridging communities of black and white people. I mean, I can go all the way back to elementary school. I remember my first job out of college was a newspaper reporter. And I had gotten a job on a daily newspaper in Spokane right out of college. And normally that is not what journalists, you start off at small newspapers. And here I got on this large newspaper. The paper's now defunct, but it was called the Spokane Chronicle. It used to be two, the Spokane Review and the Spokane Chronicle. I went to work on the Spokane Chronicle, and I knew that I had been hired on that paper because they wanted a black person there. I didn't care about that because I just cared that I had a good job. And then one day there was a shooting. Now we're talking about 1975. And it was a cop that had shot a black kid because he thought the kid had had a gun in his hand. It was a glove. And the mother, and of course, you got these two newspapers, right? They're trying to get the story. And my city editor came to me and he said, Donnie, she only wants to talk to a black person. And you don't have to go. But if you go, we'll get the story before the morning paper. The first part of me is saying I'm being used. The other part is saying, you're a journalist, go get the story. And I did. I did my job. And the pastor was there, the mother was there, and we prayed. That wasn't a part of the story, but we did. But I recognize now, looking back, that was part of that's part of God's gift to me. And I can think of many instances where that's happened. I don't like it because it's painful. It's draining. It's, I don't like it because it imposes on my personal well-being. And every time I find myself in between these situations, I know that I'm supposed to be there, but I feel like part of my life is being siphoned away. Because some of the same things that I work with white people about dealing with systemic racism and issues are the same as it was in the 70s as it is in 2021. And it saps my energy. It hurts. But God said, that's your job. And you know something, my wife has had similar situations. She's been in situations, because she's a member of the club, you know. She's been in situations where other white people will start talking about things. He has to say, hold up. I just need you to know something. My husband's an African American, and you're going to see him. I don't want you to be like too crazy to know that you had this conversation with me, and then you see him later. So I just want you to know how I feel. It's part of the mission. And it's a burden. It is an absolute burden. I had to shut down in 2020, and I basically said, I don't want to talk to white people other than the one that I live with and the kids. My grandkids are white. That was it. Because I just got tired of people saying, Donnie, what do you think? Oh, Donnie, it happened again. Oh, you know, can we have coffee together? Can we go for a walk? And out of the greatest honesty, my white brothers and sisters they said, you know, you've been the person to help calibrate all of this. And I just didn't have it. I said, no, I'm not, I can't do that with you. When the Trayvon Martin thing happened, it really messed me up. What was that, 5-6 years ago? Kid just coming from the store, going home, and George Zimmerman decides that he doesn't belong there. Now, I don't want to go through the whole story, but it messed me up. I went through my Facebook page and I said, if I ever got caught in a racial situation, who would carry me? Who would have my back? And I got rid of white people who I didn't think would do that. Now, I don't know if that was right or wrong, but it's a burden. It's the cross that God has given me. If you want to, I'm not a very good friend to people. You got to really work at being my friend, because I put people through a lot of tests. And I tell you, a person that I put through a lot of tests is he still on? Is Keith Gustafson. I met Keith at Shoreline Covenant Church and found out that this white man was a missionary to the darkest of Africa. And I said, tell me something, Keith. And he didn't know me that well. I said, tell me something, Keith. When you go to Africa, when you go to the Congo and you talk about Jesus Christ, does he have blue eyes and blonde hair? What is the Christ? Tell me about the Christ that you preach to those Black Africans about. I want to know. And Keith said, well, why don't you come to Congo and see? And I did. We had a very strong, godly adventure in Congo for 3 weeks. And it just made me richer in understanding this bridge building piece. because I was watching him build bridges as a white man in the blackest of Africa, and how they loved this man, trusted him. I went to one place, he took me to one pastor's home, and they held hands like girlfriends and boyfriends. He held hands. And it didn't mean the same as it would back in the States, but that was a sign of affection. One brother to another, Black African to a white American. And it inspired me. It made me think about this mission. So yeah, I know my life has been shortened by this burden that God has given to me. It's a burden. It's a burden on my wife. But it's the assignment God gave us for 32 years now. And I just keep walking it.
Keep walking. You know, as you was talking, Donnie, you talked about the thing that kind of hurt your heart. I think in 2013, you talked about Trayvon. He was killed in 2012, so it would have been about 13 years ago now. But in 2013, George Zimmerman was acquitted for Trayvon's murder. My wife and I happened to be in New York City when the verdict came down, and we were in Times Square. And in the summer, if you've ever been there, Times Square is already shoulder to shoulder people. I mean, it's hard to get around and move around. There's so many people there. And because of the verdict, there was a 1,000-person march that came through Times Square, stopped traffic in every direction. You could not budge. Taxi cabs were at a standstill. If people were trying to get somewhere fast, they were definitely going to be late. And that was a Saturday evening. And so the next day we were committed to going to worship somewhere. And we went to worship at a church that's well known across the nation. And the church happened to be led by a white pastor, but the church is about 30 to 40% African American. A good number of Hispanic, Asian, etc., and naturally white. And when I got there, not a word was said about Trayvon, about George. No prayer was offered for the city, for the nation, for the Martin family, for Zimmerman's family. Not one thing. And I was so dismayed that the church was so committed not to saying anything, particularly since such a large portion of the congregation was African American. It really floored me. It absolutely floored me. And it showed me something about the church that I did not want to see. And that was in many ways, it just didn't matter because we're so committed to Jesus and the ways of Jesus and the gospel of Jesus. And the gospel never touches real life. And that really struck me. And that set me down a road to having conversations with leaders of other ethnicities, asking, what's it going to take for us to become the family of God? Asking, what are you going to do to help your church get a handle on the tension and to help get some release from the tension that we have been living with so constantly? And many times they had no answer. Had no answer, but it led me to say, no, we've got to get after this. We as a church have got to start having conversations about all of this, and we have to help our people, right? And it's true in reverse as well. We always talk about it from the white angle, but it's, Donnie, you'll agree, it's true from the Black perspective as well. There's some work that we need to do as Black congregations, African American congregations, Hispanic congregations, to help this problem as well, because in many ways, we all contribute to the problem in one form or another. We don't like to admit that part though. But yes, we can do so.
So you both have made reference to things not changing, and when we're talking about what would King be touched with. I think that the idea that, you know, for now 50 years, we have not moved the bar very much farther, and we seem to be at another catalytic moment. So I'm going to open up our time to just general questions, and you can type those questions in the chat is one way. You can raise your hand like you've been doing. But I thought to leave that out to both of you, and I know this is not necessarily a panel from me moderating, Harvey and Donnie, but for the two of you to respond to, what do you think? What are some of the things you think what needs to change? What can move us forward? I also posted in the chat for everybody, Caprice Hollins, who's one of the women who's being recognized for the Vision for the Mountaintop Awards on Monday at the ML King Prayer Breakfast. That's my subtle, continuous promotional piece. Caprice did an article, what can white people do to move the conversation on what race forward? And it's a great TED Talk. And so I made the link to a TED Talk here that Caprice does. And she has some really, really good points trying to bring back to like why this continues to be an issue, and what can white people do to start moving this conversation forward? From your perspectives, what can we do? What can change so that 20 years from now, 50 years from now, folks aren't saying, you know, when George Floyd was killed and they had that moment, they could have done something. What needs to change? Donnie, Harvey went first last time, so I'll put you on the spot.
Oh, I thought you were asking a general question. I'm sorry.
No, that's a question to you first, while people have a chance to think about their question in the chat.
Well, that's an easy question for me. Love your neighbor, forgive the people around you, and reconcile your differences. That's it. Love, redemption, reconciliation. And it's a message not only for white people, but it's also for Black people, it's for brown people, that is, in a nutshell, what Dr. King said was the beloved community. That's the gold at the end of the rainbow. For those of you who have Irish ancestry, you probably get that. That's what we're building for. And let me tell you, that's hard work, no matter what it is your mission is that God has assigned you.
Yeah.
Because there's some people I just do not want to love. And I saw a lot of them on January 6th. But that's not what Christ has taught us. Forgive them. Create space for redemption. Really? Donald Trump? Reconcile your differences. I have a neighbor that is 2 doors from me. Nicest guy you ever want to meet. He would literally give you the shirt off his back. I mean, he is such a kind man. He is my Donald Trump supporter in the neighborhood. He's got Blue Lives Matter signs on his yard. I got a Black Lives Matter sign. So I'm sure when people walk by our house, they are interested in this conflict. But we don't have a conflict. We talk, we don't agree on politics, and we decide that there are other things that we can't agree upon. And that is the personal thing that I work on, to say, yes, you can love people who are different from you, even politically.
Yeah.
So those are white people, Black people, God's people. Let's work towards the beloved community.
A couple of things I'll add to that is,
Thanks, Donnie.
You took me immediately to Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require? Love mercy, act justly, right? And then to walk humbly. We need a double dose of the Holy Ghost, folks. And we need a double dose of humility, because it's arrogance that causes most of the turmoil and fights that we have with each other, because we have to always insist on being right. And there was a book that was written by Pastor Joe Garlington out of Pittsburgh years ago, and it was titled "Reconciled or Right." And some of us are more committed to being right than we are to being reconciled. Another thing that comes to mind for me is I am hoping that we would be led more by the gospel than partisanship. I want to say politics because that's a little clearer, because politics in itself is not bad. It's the art of making deals, right? But it's the partisanship that's killing us and being so wed to your perspective that you don't give any room for the other perspective that possibly be right. And there, for me, there are too many of us, even in the house of God, in the family of God, who are led more by our politics or our political persuasion than we are the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so for me, if we're going to move forward, I think we're going to have to do that. And then I would love for us to get out of this either or syndrome that we've been stuck in forever. It's either this or either that. I think it was Cornel West in his book, I think it's Race Matters. In the introduction, he makes a statement to this effect. I haven't read it in a while, but I never will forget. When I read it, it struck me. He said, when you think politically, he said, the left and the right are actually afraid to talk to each other because they might agree on something. Right? Yeah, and he said that. But we're so wedded to our perspective that we can't possibly see the other side possibly being right. And I believe most solutions to the problems that break our heart is probably going to come out of a combination of the two perspectives. So I think we have some work to do. Obviously, we talked earlier about the heart change. I was listening to you all. In order to, what do we do? We got to work to bring about a change of heart in people. Right, the heart leads the head and the hand. I think we have to still continue to work multi-ethnically across those ethnic lines and socioeconomic lines. And at some point, we've got to get Cedar Green and his wife, Liz, and whoever else they're in either an interracial situation or they have children or grandchildren who are biracial to talk to us as well. But I'm really curious as to what you all feel when you hear these black and white and other conversations, when you are both and in many ways, or you're a combination. It's got to be something there that we can learn. And then the other, I think in order to move us forward, we got to keep moving with a forward-facing vision. It's not about going back, but it's going forward, a forward-facing vision. And that's what Dr. King had. He knew what was, right? Which is why they did what they did, because they were looking forward. And I'm looking for that group of people who want to move this thing forward and not stay stuck on pause where we are currently. So just a couple of thoughts that come to mind. Now, others can respond as well.
Thank you both. And we have a small enough group that if people want to unmute and ask their question, I think you can do that. A number of you raised your hand and we can call you and recognize you too. But or if you feel like it, you can throw in a question in the chat box and we can ask it that way as well. So posing it to everybody, what can we do to make change and to move this thing forward?
So
Thank you, Donnie.
but I don't know if you can see me. This is Florence.
Go, Florence.
I just want to read a quote that I read. I just started a new book, but this is by actually Benjamin Franklin. The quote says, "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are."
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to figure out how to get to that point. I remember Donnie on the Sankofa journey that we were on together. He was Keith's partner. And at the end, he said, "I don't get to wake up and decide if I'm going to work on this today. It's my life every single day. And are you going to choose, you who have a choice, are you going to choose to be on that with me?" And it's just, yeah, that keeps niggling at me.
Thank you.
Caprice in that article, what people can do, she talks about part of recognizing privilege is that recognition that you get to choose to work on stuff or not. Like every day she's forced to walk in a world that sees her as a Black woman differently and she can't avoid it. She can't, check it. She can't recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Harvey.
Mike.
And
Steve?
Liz and Steve, Cedar Green, grandparents of August, mixed young man that is full of energy and is probably destined to find himself getting in trouble, maybe hopefully more often with his parents than the community at large. But he is a firecracker. And it has caused us to really focus on how we engage he and his family. Unfortunately, his father, our son, and the mother are now divorced, but we have a wonderful building relationship with August's great grandmother. And that is allowing us to learn more and more about the things that we have taken for granted. And actually things that we've never even understood, because they have lived this life of discrimination. And it's humbling to know that this just goes on all the time. And we have this common love for this little 7.5-year-old, firecracker that tests us. But it's really helping us realize how much we have got to continue to learn so we can be good grandparents, not only as we support August, but his mother. We are maintaining a relationship there. And that to me is really paramount in why we've engaged, in this opportunity, through Urban Impact and this presentation. I've shared with Harvey and Steve both about how much we're learning. And we're just beginning to scratch the surface on what we need to know to be part of the longer term solution. And we also, adopted our daughter a long time ago.
1982.
In 82 from India. She's often confused. She was confused in the early years in the Seattle school system as being Black. And we didn't totally understand just what that meant to her and bringing her up. And we're actually learning more about some of that now. And really I'm feeling just, like we really let her down in her early formative years. She is now a teacher in the system. She and Aaron Jones are buddies. And that delighted us to realize that our daughter, works and teaches down in the Puyallup school system. And she's a diversity trainer in that district. So there she's helping others learn, in some cases, what her own parents didn't totally understand. So this whole thing has been very humbling for us.
Thank you.
I guess our next step is to rise to the challenge, Harvey, and figure out where we can make a difference. I think, I'm happy in the church we're in. I think that we can do more there. And I think that I'll be glad when we're free of the COVID so that people can get out and actually get together and talk in more natural ways and build relationships. And we read that book, Be the Bridge. And it's a starting place for us. I wish I weren't quite so old, but I guess you're never too old to do what God's calling you to do.
I would say thank you to you guys for continually showing up and engaging and being examples to me of folks that are continuing to learn and engage. It's been a blessing. So I think it's not time to step up. I think you have, or you said maybe we can step up. I think you've stepped a bunch.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
And Harvey.
Marta?
I was I was gonna say, um, I don't know what to say. In that I feel like I've been pretty involved in concerns about reconciliation for what, decades. Even knowing Harvey, you and Steve for what, 30 some years. But you know, these days I feel like the more I learn, the less I know. And um, and for those of you that don't know, I have two young people. I normally live in Kenya. I got stuck on this side of the world up here in Shoreline, neighbors, Donnie, I think. For during once COVID shut the world down, but I have two kids who are Kenyan, African, that are in community college here. And my son is 23, a young Black male who off and on has had some a new development of some mental health things. So it scares me to death to have him launch out of the house when at any point. But anyway, you know, but my daughter is 21. She didn't, I mean, she did, but you've heard the phrase, she didn't know she was Black till she came to America. She wasn't, she was just normal. You know, she grew up in, you know, grew up in a big city in Nairobi, and she went to Kenyan schools and all of that. So I'm me, I'm very much there. Other elders at my church there said, hey, we're watching the news, just come home. You're you know, you're Kenyan, come home. But I'm American, I'm here, and heading back, but trying to just to navigate. But even as I watch all of it, I'm sort of doing it through two filters of trying to understand what's really going on, and where is God at work, and where can we join him in this. And at the same time thinking, this is a human problem that takes different shapes in different cultures. And in East Africa, there's not racism as such. There's tribalism, which is lethal also, you know, and it's this human condition of us, the right ones, and you others that are either wrong or you're a mystery, or, you know, and how do we be God's ambassadors, because as citizens of a different world altogether, but living very much in this one, and moving forward to God's desire for his creation and his people.
Thanks, Marta.
Yeah, thank you. Whew. Go ahead, Les. Did I see Les's hand go up?
Yeah, I would just say that Steve was a great influence on our daughter a bazillion years ago when she was working with AmeriCorps in Seattle schools, and Steve was at Urban Impact, and that was wonderful. So Steve knows our daughter, who 2 years ago adopted a black man from Florida. So we aren't in contact with they aren't in contact. It's an open adoption, but there's not a lot of contact with the family. So we're sort of in the thick of this with this little man being 2 years old on December 20th. We get to be with him. We get to be with him Thursdays and Fridays now. And, you know, it's one of those things of how do you navigate this in our own way? And honestly, the response from a number of you know, our Black friends has been either it's mixed. What are you doing this for? And I'll be blunt. You know, are you just snowflakes doing this stuff? You know, is it making you feel better about yourself, or is this, do you love this little guy? And so, you know, you sort of navigate in terms of motivation and authenticity, but all those same sorts of issues that I suppose, you know, for some appear to be third party are very real for us, looking at this little, he's a gorgeous, cute guy, and So people who were out with him, they stopped, they love him to death, but I wonder if that's going to happen when he's 18 or younger. And so that we're on a different level of this story than we were a few years ago. The other piece I would say on this is education, I think, has failed. And a couple of you know I'm a lifetime educator and you know, very passionate about the issues of reconciliation for a number of years. And I was with a group of former students down in Atlanta. About 5 of them were at different graduate programs in the area. And I happened to be down there seeing them, and we had gotten together and we did a visit to Ebenezer Baptist and went to the MLK Museum and went in and watched some of the videos, particularly from the 50s, late 50s, 60s, Steve, similar to sort of the then and now kind of piece. And of course, there were the black and white newsreels of all of it, and the dogs, the hoses, the clubs, all of that. And we walked out of that room, and this was back in probably about the late 1990s. And it was dead silent, which you would expect, and we're going to have to sit around and try to debrief this. But what I didn't realize, and one of the young women in the group said, I have never seen those films before. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me that in our enlightened education systems, we at least haven't understood the power of that story and narrative as a way to educate, and we need to see that. So I learned a lesson there, like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm presuming they have all of this understanding and their shared experience. They didn't have that, and there was something powerful and moving about seeing that. It allowed for a teachable moment in lots of ways. And I just think the current way that we're going about these issues, sometimes, at least culturally, is completely limited to the last 5 years or 10 years at best. We have no depth, we have no perspective, which I think is why the MLK celebrations are so important, to remind us, you know, for some of us who sort of grew up in the 50s and 60s and the 70s and the movements that were going there, to say, yeah, we've been here, done this, and we might have got some baby steps, but we didn't get very far. Can we use those narratives to empower the vision of reconciliation, of being reconciled more than right, of you know, of really moving away from power as the answer, which I'm afraid so many movements reduce themselves to, and a gospel of reconciliation that puts us all at the foot of the cross.
Thank you. Thank you. Remind me of your daughter's first name again, too.
Andrea.
And her husband is Nelson.
Andrea Nelson's her husband. You wouldn't know Nelson.
I have a couple thoughts. Can you hear me, Steve?
Yep.
Okay.
Speak up, though.
One is just going off what was just
You're
said.
getting soft again. I don't know why. Once you start, when you start, you get softer.
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
What Les was saying about education, Harvey and Steve know I've been reading Polar Compromise with a couple groups, and I
Disappeared.
recommended it to the Seattle Pastors Group.
Michael,
this week, and
Michael, you're soft again.
can you hear me?
I don't know why it starts off strong and then goes low.
Huh.
It's a technical issue with Zoom. If you go to the microphone icon in the lower left, click up, audio settings, and turn off the automatic microphone, then the computer will not adjust for you.
Thanks, Keith. Now I just turned it off. Michael, if you log out and log back in, it might come back a little stronger. I would recommend that, or it might reconnect the microphone. And then if there's anybody else that has a comment or a question while Michael's coming back.
Yeah, I would say something, and that is that Dick and I are sort of on the opposite end of this in terms of you with your children and grandchildren now who you're looking at and wondering what's going to happen with them. We only have one grandchild. It's a 4-year-old grandson, and he's white. And we are wondering the same questions. We are wondering, how are we affecting him to be a better person than we've seen the last 2 weeks on television, and what can we do to make sure that he understands things as he's growing, and his parents are very aware. We have 7 kids, including our in-laws, and 5 out of the 7 of those are teachers. So they're all very aware of all of this, and great aunts and uncles about all this racial stuff and reconciliation. But Dick and I are also having to look at our part in that, and how we can contribute positively to that. So it's just from the other side of the coin, I think.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
Ken.
you.
Michael, you're back?
I'm back. I don't know if you can hear me.
Much better. Wow.
Now,
Just a couple of quick thoughts. One on the education piece, and I've had conversations with two friends who are pastors who are really bright in the last month, but they've never heard so many pieces that come out in our history and the color of compromise. We all know the good stories, but we haven't heard the bad stories. Kind of like people who haven't seen those video clips. And so I'm just pushing that book on my pastor friends. Like, you need to know the whole story of the church's complicity with racism. But in the second thought, I'm moving the conversation forward. I've just been living this week in Philippians 2, and how Christ had this position of honor, power, privilege, but he was willing to leave it all behind and become a servant and humble himself to the point of death. And I'm wrestling with the last 6 months as a white pastor, as a white man, what it's going to cost me to really move this conversation forward. And I think we all have a part to play, sure, but for people who have privilege, how can we give our resources away, our influence, our positions? I think that's what I'm wrestling with, is to make a difference in my neighborhood, in my church. There's some fear there that it's going to cost me, and how much am I going to have to give up? But I think as white people, to move the conversation forward, we have to be willing to give up power and privilege and resource.
That's good. Thanks, Michael.
Michael,
Jeff,
can
yes.
I challenge you, instead of thinking of as giving up, can I challenge you to consider share as a different word?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you, Arlene.
That's helped me in my process.
And may I just say, sometimes as I listen to the conversation, not just tonight, but the ongoing conversation, we've also, though we bring it in, a lot of the conversation tends to be the reconciliation of Black-white, or building those bridges. And I remember being, some of you here know, like Susan Okamoto Lane, who worked with at SBU, and I went to Seattle Public Schools, and I didn't know until probably, well, after college with her as a colleague, I knew nothing about the Japanese incarceration. I knew nothing. I thought, how could I have come through public schools and never learned that history? But it was her parents who were, lost everything. And that's very close. That's not grandparents, great grandparents. And I just think we have problems trying to figure out, how do we you know, what is it? There's a proverb that until the lion learns to write, the hunter is always glorified. You know, and so how do we write history that is fair, that is inclusive and helps people understand the bigger stories? And that's part of figuring out that we're all made in the image of God, and we all have value, and there's been wrongs in many places that we're, you know, the brokenness, and how can we be agents wherever that shows up? And how can we be wounded healers if that's the situation for all of us?
Thanks, Marta. Jeff, you've been patient.
Oh yeah, I want to thank Jan for bringing up the other side of the coin. You have a young kid. I have an older grandkid that's 17 and is sort of on that, you know, what's going on today. And it's it's almost a question I'm not expecting an answer, but how do I approach that person, my granddaughter, about what's going on? And, you know, I think Donnie said, you know, I've got a Black Lives Matter sign in my lawn and my neighbor has a Blue Lives Matter, and she's sort of in that camp, that type of thing. So I'm looking for ways to talk to her. I've talked to her briefly, but you know, but how do you do it in a loving way? So that's what I had to say.
Well, folks, it is 8:45 and we committed to being here till 8:30. So thank you for your long suffering with us in this conversation. Normally we're better at watching time and kind of gearing it together, but the conversation's been rich. So I don't want to apologize for good and rich dialogue. I just want to make sure that we don't lose Donnie before we say thank you. Donnie, very much appreciate you and appreciate Ross long suffering with you. I think you said you've lost some age, and I'm sure that, you know, Ross has as well in the process. So no, it's been great to be with you. Thank you from Pastor Harvey and I for being willing to engage. And I would love it if maybe Pastor Harvey could pray for the Edmonds event and pray for the influence that you've had there with the Diversity Coalition and just the work that you're doing in that community. I know that this mantle has been one that you didn't choose necessarily, and it's God's call on your life. And so maybe we as a team can just bless that call and thank you for prayer. Thank you in prayer, and thank you for tonight. Very much appreciate your sharing. Pastor Harvey, will you close us and pray for Donnie?
Sure. God in heaven, again, we thank you for who you are. Thank you, God, that you are not like us, capricious, but you are steady and you are faithful, God, and you do not change. And your desire for us has been the same from the beginning. Just pray, God, that you would help us to live into your vision and into your passion and your will. God, and then we thank you for Donnie and for Ross and for their commitment to you and to each other, God, and then to helping your people be your people, in fact. We're grateful, God, for you using him to inspire the breakfast that we have been involved with for a number of years now, and then what's happening at Edmonds, God, and then encouraging that brother in Portland to keep it going, man. And you do surprise us some incredible ways. So I pray that you continue to encourage him, encourage them both, he and Ross. God, ask that you would bless them as they engage with the grandchildren and as they try to work through all the issues related to racial tension, so that again, we can be more like you. We can't do it in our own strength. Forgive us when we attempt to do so, but strengthen us, anoint us, so that your will would be done in earth, in us, as it is in heaven. And we also pray for the breakfast that will transpire as well. Pray that both of these events will not just be good events, but that they would be inspiring, that people would be encouraged to move forward and to grasp that forward-leaning vision
Yes.
for each of us. And it's in your son's strong, precious name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So folks, we will be back together. Typically, we are on the first Thursday of the month, and we'll go back to the first Thursday in February. And we'll get an email out announcing who the guests will be. Thank you again, Donnie, for tonight. And
My pleasure.
I will just say, Jeff, when Harvey was praying, I had this thought that one way to engage your granddaughter would be to invite her to the Edmonds event, and it's not an early morning, so it's not as painful, and it's free. But you could say, hey, let's do this event together. Let's just
Right.
engage in, because their event also has an arts focus, and so it'll be engaging. Brenda Salter McNeil is the special guest, and the so it'll be good, neat content for dialogue, and it's about becoming brave, and so she's good at engaging young adult audiences, I think, especially. So just a thought, might be a way to engage the conversation. I put the events in the chat box, and we will see you all the first Thursday in February. Thank you all.
God bless all of you.
God bless.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Okay. Bless you. Nosley, now you get to start your day.
Nosley, where are you? Oops. Are you in Egypt?
She's in Cairo.
Oops, you're muted.
You're muted, Nosley.
You're back in Cairo. Okay. You're up the road. Oh, well, yeah, I mean.
Up the Zoom room.
Yes. It's good to see you. Thanks.
Good night, all. Rest well.
You're muted, Nosley. I don't know. You're saying something.
Mentioned Cast, a book by Isabel Wilkerson. Have you looked at that?
Say the full name again.
Cast, C-A-S-T-E, by Isabel Wilkerson.
I've heard a lot. I haven't read it either, but I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, I'm in it now. It's good.
It's a very good book.
Yes.
It's very heart-wrenching. So I agree with it.
Nice.
I'll have to look that one up.
All right. Good night, all.
All right, good night, all.
Night. Good.
We already lost Dick, Jan. Tell him bye. She's gone. All right.